All right. So, like I said before, I have on the downloads, I close the window, of course, but in the canvas, I have the Angry Spartan that you can use, so you don't have to draw your own if you don't want to draw your own. But if you'd like some going beyond points, then you can do your character there, and then same thing with the background. Okay, and you can see how simple the background is. It's not incredibly complex. It's just a bunch of like shapes. That's all it is. And again, the idea with this is that all your elements that are at different depth levels are on different layers. So that way, as you move them in After Effects, it appears that they're actually at different depths. So even my clouds, which are, this one's hidden, there he is, and this one and that one, those are all three on different layers because I want to be able to control them separately. My main platform, the bounce platform I called it, is on a separate layer. The Pantheon is on a separate layer. The Pantheon platform, which is this little block here, is on a separate layer. The cave. It's always better to go maybe too many layers than not enough layers, okay? Because you can always change stuff, modify it, whatever. And even these mountains are on different layers. And just like I talked about last time, you can see how here is my canvas area. I've gone beyond that canvas size or made my canvas really big so that I have that area to go in. If I locked it just to that document size, I couldn't really move it left or right at all. So you want to make sure you have that. In this one, the character is not on a square sheet. It doesn't matter. I showed in the video how you make it in a square document. That doesn't matter. It's going to come in exactly the same way. But just the same way as the other one, everything that I want to be able to manipulate separately is on a separate layer. So each eyebrow is on a separate layer. Each pupil is on a separate layer. Each eye line is on a separate layer. Each eye socket is on a separate layer. His top beak, his bottom beak, his body, and then his arrow, okay, or spear. I might call it an arrow.
Why is it a red line?
That's a gash, because he's a warrior. Yeah. He's a Spartan. He wears it proud. Sorry, Mike. Mike's a U of M fan. All right. So, in After Effects, I'm just going to import my stuff. 1900. Remember, I made my AngryBird folder. I copied that template folder. I drug my artwork into that folder. I am going to rename this so that I have everything cool. We'll call that AngryBird. I accidentally imported. I didn't go to open. Let me open that. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to make a new composition. 960, 540, 30 frames. The duration, I'll go a minute. It's not going to take a minute. It'll probably take 30 seconds, but it's good enough, good amount of time. Rename this. Bird. And then I'm going to import my artwork. So I just double click. I find my artwork. I'm going to do the AngryBird background first. So I go to my Spartan background. Every time we import, we want to make sure it's set to, why is it so blurry? It's crazy blurry. You can still read that kind of. Composition, retain layer size. Okay, and what that's going to do is it's going to resize each layer to fit the item. Okay. If you don't have that on, if you have a small cloud like this, it's going to think the layer is that big. So we don't want that. We want the cloud to be sized to the cloud size. So we make sure that's clicked and we hit import. It makes a composition here, which is the, if I double click it, it's all the sky background stuff exactly as it was laid out in Illustrator. We're not going to need this or use it. I'll get to it in a second, but I just want to throw it in a composition so I have it. I also made my AngryBird layer. I'm just going to drag that into artwork. So that's all there. All right. So now what I'm going to do is just copy all these layers. I'm just going to grab all of them, hit Control C, go to my AngryBird, hit Control V, and now they're all inside this composition. You can see how big this entire thing is, and that's fine. It'll all be adjusted when we start putting our camera in and moving stuff around. So don't worry about, it's too big or whatever. All right, so what I need to do is I'm just going to turn all the layers off just so for you it's easier to see what I'm doing. And then we'll start turning things on. Everything is going to be a 3D layer. Your AngryBird will be a 3D. All your background elements will be 3D. So that is what's going to make it have that depth. So starting off with the clouds here, I made them all 3D. You can see the 3D thing there. I'm going to turn one of the clouds on, and you'll see that this cloud is way over here. Okay. I'm going to not move it left and right, up and down at this point. All I want to do is just push it way far back. Okay. Just so we can see a cloud. I guess I can just move that one over. Just so we can see where it's at, I'm going to take this and hit P, and then I'm just going to move the Z backwards. Now, it's going to be kind of odd. If you look at this, I'm going in the negative direction, so this is negative 500 right now, negative 600. It's getting closer to the camera. So it seems weird. Pushing it away from the camera is actually going to be in the positive direction. So you don't have to know specifics about how far to move anything. Just kind of pick a starting point. So in this case, I'm going to pick 2,000. Okay. Now it looks like it's gotten smaller. It hasn't. It's just further away from the camera. So if this cloud is 2,000 and I go to the next cloud, the next cloud is going to be, let's say, 1,800 because it's a little bit closer than the first cloud. And then the next cloud will be, let's say, 1,850. So those are kind of closer to each other. Okay. Then the next item here, which is this bounce platform, that's going to be right up against the camera. So I'm going to leave that one exactly at 0. I don't want to push that one further back because that's my front item. If I had other stuff in front of him, like let's say I had grass or trees or something, that's where I would start to use the negative to pull that forward. Okay. Let's see, what do we have here? The Pantheon. So let's take the Pantheon and we'll push that back. Now the clouds are 2,000, so they're like that far away. They're clouds, they're in the sky, they're going to be really far away. The Pantheon is probably 500 away, let's say. These are just random numbers I'm pulling out. There's no math involved. It's literally just, here's a range, and I'm just trying to pick spots of where I want these items to be. Okay. Here is the Pantheon platform. Any guesses what the Pantheon platform's Z position is going to be? 500, right? Because it's sitting underneath the Pantheon. So we'll just put 500 there. Here is the cave. Now at the very end of my animation, the AngryBird bounces to the cave. So what do you think the Z is going to be on that one? Yep, 0, right? It's not going to move. All right, let's see what else we got. We got the soldiers that are these guys here. Those are going to be right by the AngryBird. So again, we're going to go with 0 because he's the same spot. And then we have some mountains way in the background. All right, so looking at our distances, the clouds are around 1,500 to 2,000. The Pantheon is at about 500. So obviously the clouds or the mountains are going to be somewhere between those two, right? So again, we just kind of pick some random numbers. 1,000, sure. And then let's say this one's going to be 1,200. And then this one is going to be 800. Oops, I can turn those on so we can see them. There we go, there we go. And then finally the background. And this is just a background color. So what do you think the background color is going to be? No, like positioning. Where would it be? Way back, like past the clouds, right? So if the clouds are at 2,000, this will be behind the clouds. So 2,200. Just something behind it. Okay? Now, this is just a gradient. I could have just drawn this inside of After Effects too. All my shapes are so simple, I pretty much could have drawn any of the shapes inside of After Effects. It just makes it easier in Illustrator. If I decided I wanted to change this shape, I can go into Illustrator, change the shape, and it'll update, boom, inside this file. Okay? So it's a really good way to keep your workflow. That way you know exactly, like, keeping things separated. Cool. All right, so there's all my stuff. Now, it looks like, you know, not a huge difference. We don't see the soldiers on here. We don't see the cave on here. Some of the other stuff is not there. But here's where it's going to be different. When I make a camera now, I use a one-node camera because that's the easiest one to use. You can play with the zoom. And what this is going to do is just change how much the camera moves in and out. Don't worry about it now. You can always come back and play with it. You can also play with these presets, like 35mm camera or zoom. There we go. Okay. So the focal length is 135. The smaller this number is, the more fisheye it's going to be, or the more deep it's going to feel. Okay. So if I went with a higher number like 200, if you are a photography major, you may know this. If you go with a 200, it's going to take all of your stuff basically and like squash it so it looks pretty flat. The smaller the number goes, the more I'm going to feel that movement in there, okay? So just to show you, I'll go with 200 first. Okay, so there's my camera, and you see already that the clouds have now kind of like squashed in there. A second ago, they were not like that. I don't think I can just, yeah, there we go. Okay. Now, if I go to my position here, now what we're going to be doing in this case is I'm just moving left and right. Like I talked about before, you may move left and right, you may move up and down, you may move both directions at the same time. So if I move left and right, you'll see that there is some parallax happening. If you look right here, do you see these two, that distance right there? If we didn't have 3D space and I simply moved these items, they would have the exact space the entire time. There would not be a difference. But as I move them with the camera, you can see how that distance is changing. Right now it's closer together, now it's further apart, right? What's that? Oh. If I double click the camera, I can change this, so I'll change it to a 15mm. And you'll see now, look at all that, it's like crazy zoomed out, okay? So then in order to see this, I need to move my camera closer so I can just reset the Z position. That maybe is too far. Yep. There we go. Okay. And then I'll use my X position, and now you can see what that's looking like. Okay. So you have to find obviously a good number that's going to work for you. Because of the values I put in there, going from 0 to 2000, this isn't going to work for me without me resizing stuff, okay? Now, I do get a nice feel because as I do move left and right, I do get this like really cool, a lot more parallax happening in there. It feels a lot bigger than the 200 did. So let's say that I wanted to keep it at this. What I would do is I would go to each one of my items that is no longer the correct size and doesn't fit on here anymore, and this is where I could go through and just scale it up. So if I just scale up that sky, now the sky is going to fit the entire thing. And now I can still move left and right so that I can see the sky. But then obviously all my other elements would also have to be scaled up too. Okay? So in this case, all I'm going to do is just kind of go opt for something maybe a little bit more middle of the ground, so at 50. Or 35. There we go. And then I'll reset my zoom here just so we're back a bit. There we go. All right, so that seems to work pretty good right there. Okay, I got some nice parallax, I got some nice depth. I am not liking what this mountain is doing. It's kind of like cut out, I believe. If I find where that mountain is, mountain here. I'm going to click on, if you click on source name, it'll show you the actual like file it came from and the layer. If I just click on layer name, it just shows me the file. It's much easier to see. Mounted one. Oh, no, that's my Pantheon platform. Okay, so that's not a big deal. This is literally just a flat layer, so I'm just going to stretch this out. There we go. All right, so now I can go back to my camera and move this side to side. Okay. So what I'm looking at here before I get any further is how I want to frame my shots. Okay, now this may seem like a weird thing to even be thinking about, but I need to understand where my AngryBird is going to be and how he's going to flow from the start of the animation to the end of the animation, because that will kind of dictate how this whole thing is set up. In this case, he's going to start off right here. He starts off, in my video, starts off right in front of the soldiers. and then he just moves along this way. Okay? It's a very simple animation. It'll stop it about there. Now, I may want this a little bit lower or a little bit higher or whatever. Those are things that I should kind of decide at this point, right? If I go lower, you can see that my mountain is kind of cut off. Not a big deal. I can still move the mountain and just grab it and move it down. Or I can scale it and move it up to scale it bigger. Either one of those options works. Okay? Just because we drew it in Illustrator doesn't mean we can't tweak it inside of After Effects. All right? But you just want to get an idea of how far things are going to go, because that will help dictate what the Angry Bird is going to do. All right. So there is just the basic background. I really don't like this because I lose a lot of like the upper area. Like my clouds are now not really visible as much. So I'm just going to undo that back so I'm more in the middle. Bless you. I'm going to move that cloud up. I'm going to move this cloud over and up. Whoops. Nope. Nope. There we go. Cool. All right. So this gives me a basic layout of all my stuff. Now the next step in here, and I'm not sure, I have in the videos that are on Canvas, I have one order that I may have done these in. It doesn't matter what order you do these things in. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to add some texture to this so it has more interest. Okay. Right now, because my colors are just flat colors, they're actually pretty boring to look at. I want to add some visual appeal to these shapes. So there's a website called textures.com. I believe I've shown this before. If not, I'm showing it now. You create an account. It's free. And then if you remember your password, this is the problem with the world, is that there's too many passwords out there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and now they're getting to the point where they're like, oh, you need to have specific case sensitive.
Right. One says you have to, the other one says you don't. One says you need a letter, the other one says you don't. It's ridiculous.
Right, and it's like, why is this the website's problem? Like, I like my password.
Oh, I am not a robot.
You also need facial recognition.
I need facial recognition. That's exactly what I need. Yep. All right. So pretending that I logged into this, I don't remember my password. I'm going to go find textures that I want to use for my mountains, for my whatever, okay? So you don't have to use the actual thing. So if I have a mountain, I don't want to typically find like a mountain texture. I want to find something that just looks kind of like a mountainy kind of texture, okay? If that makes sense. So let's say like for my platform here, it's probably going to be made of stone. So maybe I go to, I think there's a stone category here, or I can just simply type stone. There we go. Okay, ignore these ones. Those are for other stuffs. Something like this could work. Something like that would look stupid. Something like this would probably look stupid. Yep, that's the best thing about this, is all the stuff here you can download and use for free. Now you only get 15 credits a day, which means you can download like 1 or 15 images, or some of the images are bigger, so they're 2 credits. So you can, at most you can download 15 a day. But yeah, it's awesome. Let's just pretend I'm going to grab this one, okay? So what you would typically do is that you would log in, and then you would click on log in to download, and you download the image. I'm having a mental lapse, so I'm just going to save this image and drop it into my thing. Or I will click on this image. Oh my gosh. I'm pretty sure that's it. Yes, I know. Haha. There we go. I didn't put my email address. All right, so you see this one is 2 credits. This one is 1 credit. Our resolution on our stuff is 960 by 540. That's what our resolution is, okay? If I take this item and I scale it up so that I'm seeing a part of it, it's this big, I'm only seeing this part, that part has now been stretched to 960 by 540, so my actual item is much, much bigger, okay, if that kind of makes sense. So the best thing to do is, over the course of a week, go to the website and download the textures you want at the biggest size you can get. Okay? So I always try to get the biggest ones. You can also, it's not, I always say these things are not expensive. It is expensive if it's just like you have like very little money, but $100 over the course of a year, you can get all of these, like the highest end ones. And if you break it down into how often you would use this, if you use it a lot, it definitely could be worth the cost of it, especially because they have so much stuff here. I do have an account. I just didn't renew it. So I did have an account. I just didn't renew it. Okay, so there's my Rocky texture. So I'm going to copy this into my downloads, from my downloads folder. Oops, and put it into, yeah, artwork. Yeah, just skip that. Okay. All right, so now to show you how that applies, I'm actually going to make a new folder in here. I'm going to call this textures. And I'm going to import that texture inside it. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want this bounce platform right there. I want that bounce platform to have the same texture as that Rocky texture. Okay. So now just to show you, if I drag this down here, there's that Rocky texture. If I were to, this is one way you could do it. It's not going to work. I'll show you how I want to do it. But if I go here and I say track matte, do the alpha of that one, you'll see that that definitely looks like it worked. But what happens is when I go to my camera, and I go to my position of the camera, you'll see that that rock texture doesn't actually move because it's like locked to it. Okay. So then I could go into this and I could hit position. Oops. I could unlock this. I could hit position here. I could copy this position. I could paste the position there. And then now that would work. Okay. But then what happens is our composition gets filled up with every single item having extra stuff in there. And there's like way too much stuff to keep inside this area. And it gets confusing when you have all of that. So I'm just going to delete that. So what I want to do, did I delete the wrong thing? No, I just hit it. There we go. Okay. What I want to do is pre-compose each one of these. And when I pre-compose it, I can add whatever I want on top of it. So if I want to do like 5 textures on top of one item, I can do 5 textures on top of one item. So I'm going to pre-compose this. I'm going to say leave all attributes in AngryBirds. And what that means is keep this layer as a 3D layer. If I say move it, what will happen is it'll put it back to a 2D layer, and then it'll make the new composition have a 3D layer. I don't want that. So I leave all the stuff here. I call this bounce platform. And then I can double click it. Okay. So now this is just a flat image. That's all it is. Just a flat layer, just like we had in Illustrator. Now I can drag this into here. And now I can do my track matte. And I think my background color must be set to something. Right. Oh, it's that big. Oh, my other layer is only that big. All right, so let me scale this up because that doesn't fit. There we go. All right, so now here's the cool thing too is that I can move it and adjust it and whatever. So now when I go back to my AngryBird background, oops, not that one, my AngryBird, now it has that texture on it and everything works the same way as my camera. So if I decided I wanted to add multiple textures in there, I could add multiple textures. If I wanted to, let's say in this case, I have my mountains, I want to do like little peaks on them so they have like snow or something, I could do that as one texture for the snow, one texture for the bottom, and everything would be cool that way, okay? This texture actually turned out to be a horrible texture, and so that doesn't do me any good with this one. Let me go to something just rock texture. Something like this would probably work good. That's cool. So again, I will download, and again, I will copy it to my stuff. And here's a quick way. I want to remove this image and add the new one. I can just replace the file with my new file. And what it'll do is it'll just pop it in the same exact spot. Boom. Don't have to touch it again. Sweet. So that works. And now I have that. Now I may not want that to be my actual texture. That may be like too much going on. So what I can do is I can turn this layer back on, and what happens is obviously it covers it up. And then I can go to my transparency for it or opacity for it and just knock it down. Okay? So what that does is it gives us the texture of it without having like the full-blown texture of it, right? You could also play with the mode, so I can put this back to 100. And I can change my mode here to something like add or multiply. There we go. So that way it's still tinted like it. As before, it was not tinted. It was just this color. And so by changing it to multiply, we're basically darkening that color. I could also do color corrections on this to give it a different color. We played with tint. We played with hue and saturation. You can do all those too. So what you'd want to do is, put that back on, is you want to go through and you want to add texture to all of your items. They don't have to be crazy. You can just adjust them to where you like them. If I go here and I start adjusting the opacity, you'll see that it lightens it. So that may be where I want to take this. Because my background is black, it's actually darkening as I take the opacity down. If my background is white, it'll actually lighten as I take my background down, or the opacity down, okay? So just stuff to keep in mind. I could also pick a neutral color for the background, like that, and then it'll kind of mix into that color. Okay? So you want to add textures to all your stuff, and you want to add different textures to each item. If you add the same one to it, it looks disgusting because everything is the same texture. Think about the different items, like the Pantheon would be one texture, the Pantheon bottom would be another texture, maybe a little bit different color, just to help separate them. Each mountain might be a different texture or a similar texture, but just differently laid out. These guys could all be the same texture. My clouds could all be the same texture because they're all in different spots and different colors and different shapes. Okay, and then when you're done with that, it'll look much better than just flat colors. Okay. All right, so that's the part of the background stuff. So basically you just leave it just like that. So the background's laid out. You have some colors in there. Cool. Now I'm going to import my AngryBird. Spartan bird. Same thing. We're going to import this as composition retain layer size. We import. I drop this into my compositions and I double click it. Okay. My caps lock was on. Cool. All right, so here's my AngryBird. Now you can't see his spear because my background is black, so I'll just change my color for the background so you can see it. There we go. All right, now here's where this is going to get tricky. So I'm not going to go through every step of this. The video on Canvas goes through every step of this. What I want to do is I want to give the ability to control items so that I can move him around, okay? So if I just so you can see why we're doing that. Okay, just click off. I want to click off. Here we go. If I drag my Spartan bird inside this composition, here he is, and I can scale him down. I can put him on a 3D layer. That was almost perfect, wasn't it? I'll put him where he's going to start. There we go. Now, if I want him to squish, I'm going to take his pivot and I'm going to move it down to the bottom. So I can move it right to the bottom of him. Now, as I go to scale him, he'll scale from that bottom spot. Okay? So here's what we need to fix. As I go in here and I start scaling him, look at as I scale this. That looks weird. Why is his shield scaling? His shield is made of metal. His spear is made of metal. Those would not squish down. His body would squish. Maybe his helmet would just because it's attached to him. But those two items should not squish down. Okay? Also, we have no control over what his eyes are doing. So I need to have controls over this character's eyes. So, again, I'm not going through the whole process of this, but just so you can see it, I'm going to add some controls to this layer so that I can control the other composition, okay? So what I need to do is in this composition, I need to be able to squash him, but I can't do that here, right? Because it's all condensed. I could bring all those layers into this composition and do it, but what happens is, again, we have all these layers and it's very hard to manage all those layers in one comp, or in this comp with all this other stuff. So on this composition, I'm going to go to Effect, I'm going to go to Expression Controls, and in here I can create controllers for the other composition. Okay, so I'm going to do a point control. Okay, and a point control is X and Y, so it gives you left and right and up and down controls. And I'm going to call this one left eye controller. Okay, and I can just duplicate this and then just hit enter and call this right eye controller. And then I can do duplicate that one, and then we'll just say squish down and then squish out. Okay, so I'll show you how I do these ones, and then you can watch the rest of the video. I'm going to lock this controller. Now I have to lock it because if I go to this composition, the effects go away. So I need to keep that open, hit the lock, and then go back to this, and now I can still see all these controls from the other composition. So left eye. So I'm going to go to his pupil, which is his left, not my left. I'm going to hit P for position, and what I'm going to do is, we've done this before. Remember, we alt-clicked and we can drag with the little pick whip to different things to have something else control it, right? Remember the sliding box that came in with the streaks? That's what we did. So I'm going to alt-click position. I'm going to drag the little pick whip up to the point for the left eye controller. Now if I leave it just like this, it's going to move that left eye to 960 by 540. His eye currently is at 1210 by 498. So I still need to be able to adjust where his eye is currently positioned and adjust where it gets moved to. I could leave it just like that and just reset those two numbers on the top to move it exactly where I need to move it. That's not a big deal. If I click this off, you'll see his eye is over there. And then I can use this to slide his eye back into position. Oops, wrong way. Okay, so that's one way that we could do that. The other way would be the way we did it in the other video, which is hitting the plus sign here and then adding back in its original position. Okay, so I pick whip that, and now I can go through. His eye like flew way over here. Now I can actually move it on this. So that way I have a bit more control over it. It's not a huge step, it's just hitting the plus sign and then dragging it. So that's, like I said, not a huge deal. I still can control it with this, which is what I want to be able to do. Sweet. Cool. Okay. So now I'm going to do the same thing to the right eye. So I'm going to go to pupil right, hit position, alt-click it. I'm going to drag this up here to right eye controller, and then I'll hit the plus sign and add its own position back in. Its eye will probably fly away. Yes, it did. And then I can just drag it back. I could also probably reset these, maybe to 0. Haha. That's beautiful. And that would be perfect for the other eye too. Why didn't the other eye go so perfect? Probably because I have some crazy numbers there. Let's reset that to 0. And then we'll just move this in. There we go. Now it's good. Okay. So now these are at 0, so it just makes it easier to control where he's going. That's it. Position, close that. So right eye is good, left eye is good. I may also want to create some controls for these, for his eyebrows. So eventually I'll create controls that I can just rotate them, right? So I may want him to look like this or look like that. I typically don't need them to move up and down. I can add those in, no problem. When I do his squish down, I have to control what is being squished. Like I said, things like his helmet, or like his shield, and like his spear will not squish. His eyes can squish. His beak can squish. All the other stuff can squish. It's just a matter of what I want to actually squish, and then that's what I do. So just for now, let's say that his body is right there. Okay, so let's just say for now his body is going to squish. So if I go to a scale here, oops, and I unlock that, you can see that as he goes down like this, okay, you can see that no matter what, his helmet's not going to really fit really good. So that's why I'm saying we can put the helmet as part of that, even though it really wouldn't be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take his helmet and I'm just going to parent it to his body. So that way when he does scale down, his helmet scales with it, okay? His beak too, I could put in that group also. I could parent his or beak to the body and beak to the body. And that way, again, as it squishes, his beak just automatically moves with him. Now, if I do his eyes also, all these, I probably don't want to do all the eye stuff, because what's going to happen is as he goes like, whoa, what did I miss? Eye socket. As we do this, his pupils are actually getting kind of distorted. They're like ovally instead of round, so that may look kind of odd. And plus, as we're controlling it, it may not look right. So I think what I'm going to do is leave the pupils out, but leave everything else in there. Okay, so all I'm doing now is just kind of testing it out before I create any kind of control. There we go. So that works pretty good. Sweet. So now I'm going to go to squish down and squish out. And if you look at how this is going to work, the body is going to scale this way for squishing out. Okay, and so it's going to go in or out. And then squishing down will go either this way or that way. Okay, so first thing, I have to move the pivot. So I go to body, I go to Y key, and I move the pivot right to his bottom. There we go. And now again, I can test it out. Yes, he scales from there, and yes, he scales from there. Now these are extremes. I'm never going to stretch him out that far, but I just want to make sure that it still all works. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go Alt-click my scale. And in this case, we have two controls. I have X and I have Y. I have this way I want to scale him, and I have that way that I want to scale him. So, why did I make those as points, though? That doesn't make sense. Hold on. These should not be point ones. Let me jump back to this. Let me go back to that. And I'm just going to add in expression controls, slider control. That's what I wanted. So this is a different kind of controller. So this is squish down, and then duplicate it, and squish out. Okay, cool. All right, so now what I need to do is I need to tie one of these, this one, to squish out, and I need to tie this other one to squish down, okay? So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to use a bracket. The bracket is the one next to P. It's just the square looking one. So I'm going to drag this to squish down. Nope, squish out first. I'm going to put in a comma. Then I'm going to drag this again to the other one. And then end my bracket. Okay. Now you'll see he just disappeared. And he disappeared because this is set to 0. So it scaled him down to 0 here and 0 there. Okay. So all I have to do is set this back to 100, and set this back to 100, and now he's back. So now if I do this, you'll see that he squishes that way, and if I do this, he squishes that way. Okay? So you're going to create controls for the shield, in this case, the shield, the spear, the eyebrows, and then his beak. If I want his beak to open, those are extra controls that I could add. I want to see that you have at least 5 controls on your character. Okay, that you can move around. So we shouldn't see anything like his eyes or his pupils are like locked into one position. When he animates, he needs to look where he's moving. So as he bounces up, he's looking up as he goes up, he's looking down as he goes down. Okay, so I will animate the pupils in the actual animation. The spear, as he's moving around and bouncing, the spear will also kind of move up and down like this, and the shield will also kind of move up and down like that. Okay, and then at some point his beak will open, right? So these are different controls I'm adding to my character so that I could have them easily animate once I'm here. Once I'm in this scene, I could basically just move him forward, and then I could squish him this way and squish him that way, and then just reset where his eyes are positioned. Oops. That one, and there's that one. Now, like we talked about before, we don't want to have the same control for both eyes because they'll make them look cross-eyed. There we go. Still a little bit cross-eyed. Better. Okay. So now I can control those things, and then again I'll be able to control the shield and spear and beak all from this one area. Now, just something to point out too, if you look at the size of this box that's surrounding the bird, any guesses why that box is so big compared to the bird size?
Because that's how it is in your file.
Yep. So on my composition, remember how I said that in the one I showed before, it was square, and this one is not square, obviously. So that's where I could come into my comp settings now, and this is why it really doesn't matter if you do it there or here. And you can just resize this. And now what's cool is that if you turn this lock off, you can basically just like scale this down and see how big it needs to be. So let's just say 1,000, I think would be good. Cool. And that shouldn't change anything from our animation point of view. Everything else should be good. Yep. So now it's more square than it was a minute ago. Cool. So your animation on these should include at least 2 bounces, and that's pretty much it. Okay? 2 good bounces, not just like he bounces and just like nothing happens, but I'm gonna go let's see, Z direction. Yep. Okay. So I'm gonna do 1 bounce here just so you can see how I would set up 1 bounce. So I'm setting his position right here. He knows where he's gonna be going. I'm going to scoot up just a tiny bit. Okay, I set a position keyframe, I set a rotation keyframe. He's going to bounce. So I'm going to rotate him in the direction he wants to bounce. And then as he's rotating that way, he's probably going to start squishing. So I'm going to back it up a little bit, set some squishing. Let's reset his squishing back to 100. So he's full size. And then reset these back to 0, so he's back to that. Go, good. Okay, I'll set all these keyframes. And now when he goes in for this bending here, he's going to be squishing down a little bit. And as the character squishes down, they should also squish out a little bit. Okay? If you only do one direction, then it doesn't look right. It looks like he's just scaling as opposed to like squishing. Right? So he squishes down one direction, squishes out the other direction, and then his eyes will obviously slide down. There. There. And again, I'm having him look in the direction that he's going to be moving. There we go. So now we go from here to there. And then he's going to jump. Let's say right about there. And this is seconds, so these are like way too far apart. I'm going to squish them eventually, but good enough for now. I'm going to pull them up. There we go. I'm going to rotate him back to 0. I'm going to unsquish him 0 and, oops, 100 and 100. And I can reset his eyes back to 0 and 0. 0. Oh my gosh. There we go. So now he does that. Like I said, it's way too slow. All right, so obviously too far apart, so I show all the keyframes and I start pushing these closer in together. I may want to just zoom in so I can see that. Oops. There, okay. And then same thing here, I may want to squish these a little bit further. So he squishes down. And I need to copy this position keyframe and paste it here. There we go. So now he squishes, there he goes, and then he jumps up. Now as he jumps up, he should be stretching out at this point, because what happens is your body squishes and then he stretches out really far, and then when he gets to the top, he's basically back to being a ball. So right after he jumps here, I'm going to go the other way. So I'm going to squish him up and squish him in, and then again adjust where his eyes are positioned. Now once you get this kind of like already set up, you can just reuse the same numbers. Like if you know, like every time I squish him, his eyes are here, you can just copy those numbers down and just reuse them every time.
Right, because it's the same animation, just at a different place.
Exactly. So put that there, put that there. Cool, so he sees where he's looking. I'm going to just set keyframes for, I don't know, shouldn't need to set keyframes for position. Okay, so now we go. There we go. Okay. Now as he gets up here, he's moving in this like straight line, which looks obviously ridiculous. I'm going to go past this and then set his other points. And what you'll see is, whoops, because of how the path is set up, it's automatically going to start to curve it. And then what we can do is hit the point here and actually tweak what these handlebars are doing. So we can create a nice little arc. Now as he comes up here, we should have him kind of rock back. So he starts straight up and down, and then he like rocks into it and jumps forward, and then he kind of swings his bottom so that he like lands that way, right? So we'll have him do that too, but this is just the way that I like to set stuff up. Cool, so now he's going, okay. So when he gets here, by the time he's almost hitting the ground, that's where he should be basically like rocked back all the way. So I'm going to go right to where he actually is on the ground and just pull him back a little bit like that. So now, oops, that's way too slow on the other side. Remember, we have the dots here too, so if you look at those dots, they should be pretty evenly spaced at the top of that. So if I just pull that back further, there we go, that's pretty good. Maybe a little bit further up. Okay. And then the same thing, right before he hits the ground, he should be kind of stretched out a little bit. So I'm going to go to my squashing, and I'm going to stretch him out this way and stretch him in that way, and again, reset where the eyes are positioned. And you can see he's kind of looking downward now, right? So it makes sense that he's looking where he needs to be going. Okay. There we go. And then the next part of this is going to be a duplicate of this stuff here. So where he squashes down here, I can basically copy all of these except for the position. Whoops. If I click the right button. There we go. And I copy it, and I come down to here. I'm going to go right after he lands, and I'm just going to paste it all. So now, okay, so now he's getting ready for a second bounce. This may be a little bit too aggressive. Let me just pull it back a little bit more. There we go. And then the same thing, I can go to this point, copy all of these, come up to this point, paste all of those, copy these ones, come up a bit, paste them, and then I'm just a matter of changing position at this point. So here he comes in, lands, and then right here should be his next bounce. And then right here, he should be landing. Now you want to be careful you don't move him in Z because that'll change the scale of him. So you want to be careful of that. You'll notice that as I do this, it created a nice curve for that first one, but now my second one has like this weird loop. That's going to look weird. It's going to look like he's like gliding across versus bouncing. Yes, ma'am.
Now, let's say if you had a character like jumping onto something that's like in the background, like let's say they're jumping to...
Right, so then you would do the Z,
Okay.
right? So if they are going back and forth, then you would be doing that.
Okay.
If we're simply going straight across like a side-to-side scroller, we would not touch the Z. We wouldn't want to touch the Z.
Alright.
But just like you said, for instance, he jumps on the Pantheon, I would animate him in Z all the way back to the Pantheon and then coming back out.
Yeah, and then make it really
Yep. Okay, so if I click on him again, this one is very rounded, so he like glides. So if I hit G to get to the pen tool, I can hold down Alt. Oops, not Alt. Every program is different, right? After Effects. Come on, undo that. Shift? Yes, it's Shift. Why wouldn't it be Shift, right? Oops. And once I break one, I don't... No, why aren't you doing it that time? Okay. It's Shift for the first one, of course, right? And then Alt for the second one. They're just screwing with us at this point, I think. And then this is what's cool, too, about this, is that we can actually move the keyframes around. So I'm moving position around. So if I look at that first bump, and that looks like a nice little hill, but then the second one looks kind of wonky, I can simply just move those points around to make it a nice hill too. Okay, or if I want him to land specifically on an item, I can just move this to that item. But that doesn't make sense, because why would he like jump here then all of a sudden glide across? That doesn't make sense. So it has to be a nice little hill for that. All right, that should be good. Now, beautiful, right? Okay, so that's what he would do, and he would continue across. Now, for your animation, obviously, to see the whole thing, you need to also move the camera. So I may need to move the camera when I do the second part of the bounce. At the end of this, I will animate the camera following him, okay? Keep all of your animations for camera movement simple. Don't go crazy. You don't need to zoom in on every detail just because you put it there. Just nice and smooth one side to the other. Also keep in mind things like this, where you have like maybe an item that's cut off the screen. You may want to end the camera before it cuts off the screen. Obviously, you want to keep your subject kind of framed so that it makes sense. I do want to see the parallax, so I do want to see the depth in these files. I do want to see the camera movement, and I do want to see, like I said, these 5 items animated on your character, okay? They could be anything. You could have a hat that just bounces up and down or something like that. That could be one of them, right? All right, cool. Any questions on that?
We need to have like
5 different.
eyes, and then the eyebrows, and then the
Well,
pieces.
1, 2. Okay, so each eye would be 1.
Okay.
And then the eyebrows could be 1 each. I would say if you're going to do eye, brow, then do another 1 or 2 extra, just because it's the same kind of thing, right? The whole purpose of what we're doing here is to prepare you for other stuff that we're going to be doing, but also if you stick to After Effects, other things that you could do in After Effects. So now is the time to really play with this kind of stuff just to make sure you understand it, okay? Make sure you have, like, if you have squish, obviously squishes and squashes, right? That's a word, right?